It is a Tuesday morning in October of 1953 in a long brick building on a side street in Chicago, and a woman named Betty is taking her seat at position 47. She is 23 years old, an Illinois Bell long-distance operator in her second year on the floor. The headset is metal and cloth fitted to her left ear. The mouthpiece is a small black bulb at the end of a curved arm, set exactly 1/4 of an inch from her lips. By the time Betty plugs in her first chord of the morning, she will have already spoken the two words that opened every American long-distance call for a generation. Number, please! This is a countdown of 10 unspoken rules she lived under every single shift. Stay with me because the rule at number 1 explains why all the others were enforced so precisely and why the voice you heard on the line was never entirely hers. The architecture of control for roughly 15 years after World War II, the American Bell System operator worked under one of the most sophisticated systems of workplace control ever implemented. The historian Stephen Norwood documented how operators were subjected to 3 simultaneous layers of regulation: a written code governing speech and posture, a culture of constant unannounced surveillance, and a metrics regime that timed every human interaction to the second. The job carried genuine prestige by the standards of women's work in the 1950s, yet the pay was lower than almost any other position in the building, and the technology that would eliminate these jobs entirely had already been launched in test markets across the country. Betty, like hundreds of thousands of other women, had not simply learned to operate a switchboard. She had learned to systematically dismantle her own autonomy for exactly 8 hours a day. Chapter 10. The voice audition. Before Betty ever touched a chord or heard her first number, please, she had to pass through the Bell System's most discriminatory filter, the hiring audition. Betty had been hired at the Illinois Bell Exchange in Chicago in 1952 at age 22, but only after a rigorous voice test. ATT archive materials preserved at the Morvan Museum document the company's explicit hiring standard. Operators required the ability to enunciate clearly, which in practice meant systematic discrimination against immigrants and minorities. A young woman with a regional accent, southern drawl, or immigrant family vowels in her speech did not advance past the audition. The neutral Bell voice was a hiring filter that created a monolith of sound across the American telephone network. Betty's voice had passed because it was already, by accident of birth and neighborhood, what the company needed it to be. Others never got the chance to learn the rules because their voices disqualified them at the door. Chapter 9. The scripted vocabulary. At 7:02 a.m., Betty plugs in her first chord and speaks words that are not her own. Number, please. The historian Stephen Norwood documented that Bell System manuals limited operators to exactly 115 specific expressions, each with prescribed wording, pitch, and pace. "One moment, please. Thank you. I will connect you." An operator who improvised too said, "Just a second," instead of "one moment." Please heard about it from her supervisor the same day. The phrases were not Betty's. They were the company's property, rented to her voice for the length of the shift. She brought her vocal cords. Bell supplied the words. By her second year, she could deliver number, please, in the exact same tone, 200 times a day without conscious thought. The language didn't belong to Betty. It belonged to the system she served. Chapter 8. The audible smile. Bell System advertising through the 1930s, 40s, and 50s used a single slogan: the voice with a smile. The premise was scientifically accurate. Modern acoustic research confirms that smiling shortens the vocal tract and shifts formant frequencies in ways listeners perceive as warmth. Betty was trained to smile while she spoke to callers she would never see. She smiled at the empty switchboard at 8:00 a.m. when fresh, at 1:00 p.m. when hungry, and at 4:00 p.m. on her 240th call of an exhausting shift. The smile was not for the caller. The smile was for Mrs. Caldwell, who could be listening on any call. The smile was not optional. It was company property, like the phrases, for the duration of the shift. Chapter 7. The physical geometry. The written rule list preserved from the Chesapeake and Potomac Telephone Company around 1945 governed Betty's body with mechanical precision. Keep a plug in your hands at all times. Keep your eyes on the board at all times. Sit up straight with both feet on the rail. Do not talk to the adjacent operator. Keep your headset adjusted 1/4 of an inch from your mouth. Do not change the headset from one ear to the other without calling your supervisor. Betty's posture, hand position, and eye movement were calibrated like a piece of equipment. When she sat at position 47, she became a biological extension of the cordboard, her body geometry optimized for the machine's efficiency rather than her comfort. Chapter 6. The relief handoff at 11:00 a.m. Betty's scheduled break arrives, but she cannot simply stand and walk away. The bell system operated on the fundamental principle that the board must never be unmanned. When her relief operator arrived, the woman stood behind Betty's chair and waited until the connecting cord was physically in her hand. Only then did Betty release her grip and stand up. A 1946 labor grievance documented this rule precisely. An operator relieving another must have the connecting cord in her hand as the operator going off duty leaves her seat. The position was never unmanned. It was handed off cord first in a relay race where the baton was the lifeline of American communication. Chapter 5. The permission protocol near the bottom of the company rule list was a regulation that revealed the system's true nature. Do not take an aspirin without being relieved from your position. This rule was not about aspirin, it was about total bodily surrender. Labor historian Craig Simpson summarized the reality in one devastating line. Permission was needed to take off a headset to scratch your ear. An operator who needed to use the bathroom, take medication for a headache, or simply adjust an uncomfortable headset had to call her supervisor and wait to be formally relieved. Betty's biological needs were subordinated to the blinking lights on the board. Her body, like her voice, was lent out for the duration of the shift. Chapter 4. The listening prohibition. Betty held the keys to the most private conversations in America. Lovers, businessmen, grieving families, politicians, but she was forbidden to hear them. The rule was absolute. Once the connection was made, the operator withdrew completely. Repeating any fragment of overheard conversation was a firing offense in every Bell operating company nationwide. In metropolitan offices like Betty's, this rule was enforceable. Too many supervisors, too many cords, too little time. But in small towns like Bryant Pond, Maine, where manual exchanges operated until 1983, operators knew every voice and listened because community knowledge was part of the service. Betty lived in the urban reality. She was required to be deaf to the human drama passing through her fingertips, a conduit rather than an audience. Chapter 3. The metrics cage. Every call Betty handled was measured by the Bell system's average work time, standard seconds from ring to completed connection. The targets were aggressive, the tolerance minimal. An operator whose times consistently exceeded standards faced warnings, reviews, and potential termination. The metrics created a psychological trap. Betty had to sound unhurried while being timed to the second, appear helpful while moving at machine pace. She was simultaneously required to embody the voice with a smile and complete connections with mechanical efficiency. The dual pressure of performed warmth under measured speed created what operators described consistently across companies and decades. The sensation of being permanently behind, permanently evaluated, permanently one slow call away from professional consequences. Chapter 2. The phantom supervisor. Every rule Betty followed was enforced by the Bell system's most effective psychological tool. Unannounced surveillance. Mrs. Caldwell walked the aisle behind 50 operators with a clipboard, able to plug into any line at any moment without warning. The historian Stephen Norwood documented this system plainly. Operators were subjected to regular and random surveillance by supervisors who listened in to ensure adherence to company guidelines. The first time Miss Caldwell silently joined one of Betty's calls, Betty didn't know until the connection ended and she found the supervisor at her shoulder. The correction was Swift's sentence about Betty's rising tone on please. Betty never used that tone again. By her second year, Betty could detect the faint click when a supervisor's headset joined the line. She kept her voice perfectly even on every call because she never knew which one Mrs. Caldwell was monitoring. The surveillance didn't need to be constant to be total, it only needed to be unpredictable. Chapter 1. The erasure of self. We have counted down through 9 rules: voice audition, the scripted vocabulary, the audible smile, the physical geometry, the relief handoff, the permission protocol, the listening prohibition, the metrics cage, and the phantom supervisor. All of these rules served one master purpose that the Bell system never stated openly but built into every layer of the operator's working life. Betty was not supposed to exist as an individual within the system. For 8 hours at position 47, Betty was not a 23-year-old woman with dreams, frustrations, and personality. She was a component, the human equivalent of a copper wire or brass plug. The Bell system had achieved something remarkable. They had taken thousands of intelligent women and stripped away their individuality to create a single, unified corporate entity. When Americans picked up their telephones in 1953, they didn't want to speak to Betty, they wanted to speak to the operator. And the company ensured that the operator sounded identical in Chicago, Boston, Atlanta, and Seattle. Betty's voice, body, facial expressions, and biological needs were all colonized by corporate efficiency. She was a pioneer of the modern surveillance workplace, decades before such systems became commonplace. The most complete control is achieved not through force, but through the systematic replacement of the individual self with an institutional identity so thorough that the person forgets who they were before they put on the headset. Outrow at 4:00 p.m., Betty's relief operator steps behind her chair. Betty waits, feels the connecting cord taken from her hand, and stands up. Her back aches, her ear is sore from the metal headset, her face tired from 8 hours of invisible smiling. Tomorrow, she will return to the brick building, put on her pressed uniform, sit at position 47, and wait for the lights to flash. The rules will be waiting unspoken, unyielding, absolute. By the 1970s, automatic switching will replace millions of these jobs. The rows of cordboards will be torn down and sold for scrap. But for a generation, women like Betty were the literal voices of America, connecting a continent one meticulously scripted, perfectly monitored cord at a time. The rules were unspoken because they didn't need to be spoken. They were the invisible architecture of a system that transformed human beings into perfect, replaceable instruments of connection. And the most devastating truth is that it worked exactly as designed.